The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an awesome game. Between the unlimited freedom and exploration available to players, and a suitably massive world to satiate that freedom of exploration, Breath of the Wild has taken the Legend of Zelda series to new heights. While I love this game, and I have sunk hundreds of hours into it like so many of you likely have, there are still things that I take issue with when it comes to this game. But strangely enough, the biggest problems that I have are with the DLC for Breath of the Wild. And out of all the things I could be upset about, for some reason, the thing that bugs me the most is the Master Cycle Zero that was added in the Champion's Ballad DLC. Yeah, I do not like the Master Cycle Zero in Breath of the Wild. And honestly, I feel just a little terrible about saying that. And I especially feel bad when hearing the development story behind the Master Cycle. The reason we have a motorcycle in this game to begin with is because of Eiji Aonuma, the producer of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and the Legend of Zelda series since Ocarina of Time came out. Eiji Aonuma was inspired by just riding the horse around Hyrule, and it reminded him of the first time that he rode a motorcycle. So he wanted to include a motorcycle in Breath of the Wild. However, the development team rejected the idea at first, because it could potentially break the continuity of the game. But when discussion about what to include in the DLC began, Eiji Aonuma decided to try and get his motorcycle in the game one more time. And this time, the team was all for it. The designers even bought and started to ride around a motorcycle in order to better understand how off-roading felt like. Well, that's great. I feel even worse now for hating this thing after that wholesome story about a guy just wanting to ride a motorcycle across Hyrule. However, I still stand by my case about why I dislike the Master Cycle. There are a lot of things that I just don't like about it. For starters, it's a chore to get this thing. The player must first free all 4 divine beasts. After that, and after you talk to specified NPCs to finish the questlines, you will then be given the chance to start the one-hit obliterator challenge. Back at the Shrine of Resurrection, Link is given a weapon that kills everything in one hit, but it also reduces your HP to a quarter heart. As you might imagine, everything kills you in the most stupid ways. And you have to do this through 4 new and very lethal shrines. Lethal only because you still have that one-hit obliterator, although I will admit these are very fun shrines. After completing these shrines, the weapon explodes, and raises up these platforms that lead to challenges that the champions performed 100 years ago. What you need to know is that there are 3 more shrines to complete, and then you face the Blight Ganons once again, but this time with the equipment that the champions would have used while fighting the Blight Ganons. And you do that for each of the 4 divine beasts, meaning 12 more shrines in total in fighting all Blight Ganons for a second time. No! Why are you making me go through Water Blight's awful second phase for a second time? Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest there. Well, I guess it's worth it, because all of the champion's skills are upgraded after beating all the Illusory Realm Ganons. After that, there is one last dungeon, and a fight with a dried corpse that, despite being buried for the past 10,000 years or more, is still more than able to kick the crap out of you. After all that, you are finally given the Master Cycle Zero, a divine beast of your own distilled into a rune that you can summon at any time. And the loading screen gets this adorable little motorcycle riding next to the other divine beasts. That's cool. It is also fueled by materials in your inventory, because Hyrule doesn't exactly have any gas stations. And you can just fall off the Great Plateau without taking fall damage. But then my problems with the Master Cycle begin right after getting this thing. By the time you get the Master Cycle, you've already likely explored most of Hyrule, with maybe a few exceptions here and there. So why do I have a new way of moving around the world when most of the world has already been experienced? But this thing also replaces the horses of the game. After receiving the Master Cycle Zero, all forms of traversing the world become obsolete. The Master Cycle is a rune on the Sheikah Slate, and it can be summoned at pretty much any time. Once you get the Master Cycle, horses become distractions, which is sad. Even though they have an AI that does some of the most stupid things half the time, there's still a lot of depth to the horses that is just cast aside when the horses are gone. At max affinity with Link, the horses can be customized in tons of ways. You can change out the saddle and bridle to whatever you think will look best. And you can change the mane at the same time to all sorts of goofy haircuts. But what you feed any horse matters as well. If you feed a few apples to a freshly caught horse, about 4 or 5 apples will make the horse reach max affinity in the blink of an eye. And if the player wants to power up their horse, they can feed the horse an Endura carrot to give the horse an additional 3 spurs to get them to continually run. Although, just like with extra hearts and stamina on Link, once those spurs are used, they are gone. The Master Cycle doesn't have this depth. Okay, it has some complexities to it, but nothing like horses in the main game. The Master Cycle is fueled by materials that you find out in the wild. Anything in your inventory can fuel this thing, but the most effective fuel is common fruits, crickets, wood bundles, and monster parts. And if you thought that all materials fuel up the Master Cycle the same way, then you would be wrong. It is only the cheapest of materials, the ones that you have stockpiled so many of that you don't know what to do with them. It's the materials that sell for pitiful rupees that fuel the Master Cycle so effectively. Now then, the numerous Zelda wikis seem to be full of incorrect information. There are some that claim that the Master Cycle can be fully filled up with star fragments and dragon scales. However, this is not the case. You would also be wrong in thinking that dumping different ingredients would give you different perks, because it doesn't. Now then, there is some level of depth to the Master Cycle, since there are materials that double how much the Master Cycle tank is filled up. Let's say that you have 5 Moblin Teeth in your arms that you are about to fill the Master Cycle's tank with. Each Moblin Tooth and other cheap materials will fill the Master Cycle up 10% for each of those items that you put in there. This means that those 5 Moblin Teeth will fill the tank of the Master Cycle to 50%. But if you substituted one of those teeth for, say, 1 Ancient Core, that 1 Ancient Core will double the effectiveness of the materials that Link is holding, meaning that 1 Moblin Tooth will now fill the engine 20% instead of 10%. The materials that double the fuel of items are Star Fragments, Fairies, Ancient Cores, Giant Ancient Cores, and Monster Extract. Finally, a good use for this material that doesn't involve cooking. This fuel efficiency would normally be a total save if only, well, if I wasn't drowning in monster parts! In order to get all the footage for this video, I was playing through an alternate profile to get all the relevant footage for earning the Master Cycle. And even though I skipped over a lot of stuff to see and took as simple a path as I could, I still had more than enough monster parts to keep the Master Cycle running for a long time. And you can imagine what it's like on my main profile, where I have explored as much of Hyrule as I could, and killed everything that dared look at me funny. So why in the vast landscape of Hyrule should I even bother with using this fueling system if I need a way of throwing away all these worthless materials that you can just find lying around in the world? And then there are these baffling limitations that come with the Master Cycle Zero, because there are some areas where the Master Cycle isn't allowed to go. That's right, the Master Cycle is off limits on Death Mountain and the Gerudo Desert. I can understand Death Mountain, since lava pools scatter the land, and the frenzied speed of the Master Cycle would definitely lead to people diving into lava pits. But why is the Gerudo Desert off limits? Of all the areas in the game, the empty and maddening space of Gerudo Desert would have benefited from a mode of traversal like this. However, this is in fact a blessing in disguise for these areas of the game. You see, the convenience and mock speed of the Master Cycle does something almost unforgivable. It decreases the scale and wonder of this version of Hyrule. Just think about it. What is the thing that makes Breath of the Wild so great? Besides the innovation of the Legend of Zelda brand, the beautiful art style and graphics, the ability to manipulate the physics engine with unique tools not found in many other games, the lovable characters, and you know what? There are a lot of things that make Breath of the Wild a great game. But I would argue that one of the most important aspects of Breath of the Wild is the open world of Hyrule. This is the largest and least restrictive version of Hyrule that we have ever seen, and it is densely packed with tons of content and fun distractions. The scale and beauty of this world is fantastic, and it is capable of supporting all the things that make Breath of the Wild so great, while still providing a thrilling adventure that is augmented by this beautiful ambient music. In fact, one of the best ways to experience this game is to get lost while exploring this landscape. No, really, get lost! And I don't mean stop watching this video, what I mean is that you need to just try and get lost while exploring Hyrule. It's a better way to experience this game instead of hunting down every shrine or Korok seed. That serene isolation in a map that makes you feel minuscule is just thrilling. But what happens when you add the Master Cycle to the mix? Well, it's not good. While traveling with supersonic speeds of the Master Cycle, the world of Hyrule becomes smaller. You are able to reach point A to point B so much faster that you blow past or plow through everything on the map. Because of this, the overall scale and wonder of the world in Breath of the Wild is diminished by this overpowered form of traversal. And because of that, the adventure loses most of its appeal. There is this small peninsula in the shadow of Zora's domain that looks up at Mount Raleigh-Nehru. On this peninsula is a Hinox and a Lynel. Normally, without the Master Cycle, you could go fight the Hinox for materials for the fight with the Lynel up ahead, or just steal the weapons around the Hinox necklace. As you approach the Lynel at the end of the peninsula, the dread starts to build up over time, since Lynels are some of the most powerful enemies in the game. And you know for a fact that this will be the fight of your life, or at least a close encounter. Then the Lynel spots you, and that building anxiety gets to you as you have to fight this monster. And when the beast is felled, this huge weight is taken off your shoulders. But with the Master Cycle, it's a little different. You find the Hinox and you kill it. Now the Lynel is at the end of the peninsula. As you ride to battle, the anxiety begins to build up once again. Oh, wait a second, we're already here. One Lynel fight later, and this adventure ends on a less euphoric conclusion. This is just one example that is applicable to me. For you, it could be something completely different. What I'm trying to say is that after receiving the Master Cycle, the world in Breath of the Wild loses a large part of that wondrous scale that it once had. And because of that, the experience isn't what it used to be. But I'm not that upset with the Zelda team on this, because there are other games that have this exact same problem. The biggest example that comes to my mind is Xenoblade Chronicles X, the open-world action RPG that was developed for the Wii U. However, unlike most other Wii U games, Xenoblade Chronicles X still hasn't been brought over to the Nintendo Switch. Please, Nintendo and Monolith Soft, don't forget this game! But aside from my love for this open-world experience, it has the same problem as the Master Cycle. In Xenoblade Chronicles X, there are these giant robots called skells that you can pilot and fight monsters with. After a certain amount of time, these skells will receive the Skell Flight Module. But once you receive the Skell Flight Module, the same problem presents itself with the Master Cycle. While flying in a Skell, the world beneath your feet passes by so fast and from so far away that the planet of Mira becomes small, kind of like what happens with Hyrule and with the Master Cycle. But the strange thing is, there are games out there where vehicles and flying around the world don't reduce the world's scale, like Just Cause 3 and Final Fantasy 15. So what's the deal there? Well, the thing about these worlds is that they were designed with these faster forms of traversal in mind. Just Cause 3's Medici is also massive, but it's kind of empty, because it knows players will be zooming around all over the place with Rico's squirrel suit and grappling hook, and in high horsepower sports cars. And with Final Fantasy 15, the Regalia is the most reliable way of traveling the world, and everything that you need is just a quick walk off the road. If you tried walking the distance in these games, you must have some serious free time on your hands, because these worlds are barren, empty, and anything of value is so far away, it will take you all day in the real world to get anywhere. These games were made with the intention that players would traverse the world with these modes of transportation. However, that is not the case for Breath of the Wild. You can tell that Hyrule wasn't designed with the Master Cycle in mind. It was designed to be explored on foot and horseback. Sure, horses are a fast method of moving through the world, but they have limitations that stop players from boosting through the world at the speed of sound. Managing how many spurs makes players focus at times to slow down, meaning the world doesn't shrink in the same way with the Master Cycle. There are also geographical limitations to horses, but the Master Cycle doesn't have those limitations. By just holding down the A button, you can move through this map with absurd speed, unlike the spur system with the horses that makes you slow down if just a little. If Breath of the Wild, or even the Master Cycle, were designed just a little differently as to fit a cohesive design, then I wouldn't have a problem with this. But as it stands, the Master Cycle Zero diminishes the scope and wonder of Hyrule. It also doesn't help that there isn't much use for the honestly interesting fuel system that becomes irrelevant. I honestly don't think I will be using this thing after I have recorded the necessary footage for this video, just because I love getting lost in Hyrule, and the Master Cycle makes it much harder to do so. And besides, there are other things to do in the DLC that I'd rather be doing, like getting new cosmetics and playing through one of the few challenge battle modes that I actually like. And I know I already said this earlier in this video, but I want to just emphasize it here. The next time you play Breath of the Wild, don't try to hunt down all the shrines or complete a checklist of side quests. Just try and get lost while exploring Hyrule. Exploration is one of the most exciting things to do in an open world game, and Breath of the Wild does it fantastically. So the next time you play Breath of the Wild, just go out and explore the vast and awesome landscapes of Hyrule. And if you really want to enjoy Hyrule, I recommend that you fast travel as little as possible. For the profile I was playing to get the footage for this video, I tried this thing where I would use the fast travel as little as possible. And you know what? It makes a huge difference, and I definitely recommend trying it out for yourself. And on that note, talking about Breath of the Wild has just made me want to go back and play more Breath of the Wild. Now, if you will excuse me, I'm going to get thoroughly lost in Breath of the Wild, and maybe I'll pop out the other end with a new video. I'll see you guys then. Peace.